399 American men believed they were receiving free medical care. It was a lie. For 40 years, from 1932 until 1972, scientists employed by your government watched them suffer and die deliberately. They were not being treated. They were being studied, like laboratory rats, like objects. And even when the cure became widely available in 1947, the experiment continued for 25 more years. Men who could have been saved with a simple injection of penicillin were left to rot. Their wives were infected. Their children were born with the disease. Everything documented, everything recorded, everything approved by federal authorities who signed annual reports authorizing continuation. Why? What was written in the internal memos that justified this suffering? And more importantly, how many people knew exactly what was happening and chose to do nothing? If you want to discover the complete truth about Tuskegee, subscribe to the channel now, hit that notification bell, and leave your like, because what you're about to learn is not just history, it's a pattern, a method, a mindset that continues operating today in institutions that demand your trust while hiding their actions. The information I'm about to present comes directly from government documents, congressional investigations, survivor testimonies, and medical reports that were kept secret for decades. Everything can be verified. Everything is documented. And when you finish watching, you yourself can search for these sources and confirm every terrifying detail. Let's start at the beginning. In 1932, the United States was in the middle of the Great Depression. Millions were unemployed, starving, desperate. In Macon County, Alabama, the situation was even worse. The population was predominantly black, poor, without access to education or basic medical services. It was the perfect place. Isolated, vulnerable, forgotten. Exactly the kind of community where an experiment could be conducted without interference, without oversight, without anyone important paying attention. And that's exactly what the United States Public Health Service decided to do. They created a program called the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. The name reveals everything. Untreated. They had no intention of treating anyone. The objective was to observe the natural progression of syphilis from initial infection to death, documenting each stage of deterioration. They wanted to know how long it takes for the brain to be destroyed, when exactly the heart fails, how the bones disintegrate, what kind of dementia develops in the final stages. To answer these questions, they needed test subjects, and they found 399 men who were already infected with syphilis, living in extreme poverty, without formal education, without resources to question medical authorities. The researchers went to these men and said, "You have bad blood." It was a vague term, deliberately imprecise. Could mean anything: anemia, fatigue, general weakness. The men didn't know they had syphilis. They were not informed. And then the researchers made an offer: participate in this medical study and you'll receive free treatment, hot meals during examinations, free transportation to the clinic, and when you die, we'll pay for your funeral. For men living in absolute misery, who had never received medical care in their entire lives, who had no money even for food, much less for a dignified burial, it was an impossible offer to refuse. They agreed. They signed forms they couldn't read, and they entered the experiment believing they were being helped. But they were not being treated. They were being deceived. The researchers performed regular examinations, drew blood, conducted extremely painful spinal taps where they inserted needles into the spinal column to extract spinal fluid. They told the men these procedures were treatment. They were lies. The procedures were purely diagnostic, designed to monitor disease progression, not to cure it. When the men complained of pain, of fatigue, of neurological symptoms, the doctors wrote everything down in their reports and did nothing. Absolutely nothing. They just observed and recorded, like scientists watching bacteria in a petri dish. Now here's where the story becomes even more obscene. In 1947, penicillin was established as an effective and widely available treatment for syphilis. A simple series of injections could cure the disease completely, especially in early stages. Hospitals across the country were using penicillin to treat syphilis patients. The cure existed. It was accessible. It was cheap. But the Tuskegee men did not receive penicillin. Why? Because treating them would destroy the experiment. If the men were cured, researchers could no longer study the natural progression of untreated disease. So they made a decision. Continue the experiment. Deny treatment. Let the men suffer and die, even knowing they could save them easily.
And it wasn't just passive denial. It was active sabotage. When World War II began, some of the men were drafted for military service. The pre-induction medical exam would have revealed syphilis, and they would have been treated by the Army. The Tuskegee researchers intervened. They wrote letters to military authorities asking that those specific men be exempted from complete medical exams and excused from mandatory venereal disease treatment. The letters still exist in the archives. They explicitly document that researchers deliberately sabotaged opportunities for the men to receive treatment because it would interfere with the study. Think about that. Federal doctors contacted military authorities to ensure that sick men would not be cured because they needed them to remain sick for research purposes. Subscribe now and hit that bell, because what comes next is even worse, and you need to understand the full extent of this betrayal to recognize the same pattern when it appears again, because it always appears again, in new forms, with new justifications, but always with the same underlying logic. Some people are disposable, some suffering is acceptable, and authorities have the right to decide who lives and who dies in the name of a greater good that they themselves define. Over the decades, the men began to fall seriously ill. Untreated syphilis goes through predictable stages. In the early years, it causes sores and skin rashes. Then it enters latency, where symptoms disappear, but the bacteria continues multiplying silently. Finally, it reaches the tertiary stage, where it destroys internal organs. The heart develops aneurysms, the brain deteriorates, causing dementia, psychosis, paralysis. Bones and joints are consumed, causing excruciating pain and deformities. The Tuskegee men went through all of this. Their wives were also infected through sexual contact. Children were born with congenital syphilis, suffering from blindness, deafness, bone deformities, and premature death. The researchers documented all of this. They visited homes, examined wives, examined children, noted symptoms, and did absolutely nothing to help. In 1969, a public health service employee named Peter Buxton raised ethical concerns about the study. He wrote, "This experiment is ethically unjustified. We are letting men die when we could save them. This needs to stop." His objection was rejected. Other officials responded that the study had scientific value, that it had already lasted so long that it would be wasteful to stop now, that complete data on disease progression until death was necessary for medical science. A committee was formed to review Buxton's concerns. This committee, composed of doctors and administrators, unanimously decided that the experiment should continue. None of them saw an ethical problem. None of them thought that letting men rot to death when the cure was available was morally unacceptable. They voted to continue, and the experiment proceeded for 3 more years. It wasn't until 1972 that the story finally became public. Jean Heller of the Associated Press published a report exposing the experiment. The headline read, "Syphilis victims in U.S. study went untreated for 40 years." Public reaction was immediate and furious. Headlines across the country denounced the experiment as an atrocity. Members of Congress demanded investigations. Hearings were convened. Survivors testified before congressional committees, describing how they were deceived, how they suffered, how they watched friends and family members die while federal doctors observed and took notes. But here's what you need to understand. For 40 years, hundreds of people knew about Tuskegee. It was not a well-kept secret. Annual reports were published in medical journals. Scientific articles described the findings. Medical conferences presented the data. 13 articles were published in respected medical periodicals between 1936 and 1973, openly describing that men with syphilis were being observed without treatment to study the natural progression of the disease. Doctors read these articles. Professors taught them in medical schools. Federal administrators reviewed annual reports and approved continued funding. Nobody objected. Nobody blew the whistle. Nobody stopped the experiment. For 40 years, the American medical community accepted that poor black men were acceptable experimental material, that their suffering and deaths were reasonable contributions to the advancement of scientific knowledge. Did you know that? Did you know this was not a secret experiment conducted by mad scientists operating in the shadows? It was an official program of the federal government, funded with public money, conducted by respectable doctors, published in scientific journals, and known to hundreds of professionals who saw nothing wrong with it. And the question you need to ask is why not?
What was in the mindset, the culture, the assumptions of that era that allowed so many educated people, trained to heal, sworn to do no harm, to participate in or ignore an experiment that deliberately denied life-saving treatment to sick men? And more importantly, has that mindset really changed? Or has it just become more sophisticated, better disguised, harder to recognize? Leave your like now, because the answer to that question is crucial to understanding what's happening today, and you need that understanding to protect yourself and your family from becoming the next test subjects in experiments you don't know you're participating in, conducted by authorities who believe they have the right to use you however they want, as long as it's for what they define as the greater good. After the scandal broke, the government was forced to respond. The experiment was officially ended. Survivors and families of victims sued the federal government. A settlement was reached, $10 million in compensation. Sounds like a lot, but divided among hundreds of victims and their families, it was miserable. Some survivors received $37,000, others received less. That was the value the government placed on 40 years of deliberate torture, on destroyed lives, on children born with disabilities,
on infected wives, on men who rotted alive while federal doctors watched and took notes. A bioethics commission was established to investigate. They produced a report concluding that the experiment was ethically unjustified from the beginning. But notice the careful language, ethically unjustified. Not criminal, not murder, not torture, just ethically problematic. No researcher was prosecuted. No administrator went to prison. No doctor lost their license. Some were reprimanded. Some retired quietly. But none faced real consequences for 40 years of deliberate cruelty. Why? Because they were following orders. Because they had official authorization. Because the system protected them. In 1997, 25 years after the experiment ended, President Bill Clinton finally issued an official apology. He said, "The United States government did something that was deeply, profoundly wrong." 5 survivors were present at the ceremony. Elderly men, frail, who had spent most of their lives suffering from a disease that could have been easily cured if someone had simply cared enough to give them a shot of penicillin. Clinton shook their hands. Cameras captured the moment. And then everyone moved on. The story was filed away. Books were written. Documentaries were made. Tuskegee became a textbook example of unethical research. Something that happened in the past, something that can't happen anymore, because now we have ethics committees and regulations and oversight. But is that true? Can it really not happen again? Or have we just learned to be more careful, more discreet, more sophisticated in how we conduct experiments on vulnerable populations? Consider this. Declassified documents from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s revealed that the United States government conducted dozens of other secret experiments on citizens without informed consent. Soldiers were exposed to mustard gas and nerve agents to test their effects. Prisoners were injected with cancer cells to see if tumors would develop. Mental patients were subjected to mind control experiments involving drugs, sensory deprivation, and electroshock. Entire communities were sprayed with radioactive particles and chemical compounds to test dispersion patterns. All of this happened at the same time as Tuskegee. All of this was approved by the same government agencies. All of this was conducted by respectable professionals operating within official systems. So when authorities say that Tuskegee was an aberration, a terrible mistake from the past that will never be repeated, do you believe them? When they say that now we have protections, that now there's oversight, that now it would be impossible for something like this to happen, do you accept that? Or do you look at the historical pattern and recognize that authorities always lied about experiments while they were ongoing, always classified the details, always denied wrongdoing, always protected the perpetrators, and only admitted the truth decades later when everyone responsible was already dead or retired and could no longer be held accountable? Share this video now because people need to understand that Tuskegee was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a mindset that values institutional knowledge above individual dignity, that sees certain populations as acceptable experimental material, that believes the ends justify the means, and that operates under the assumption that authorities have the right to do whatever they want as long as it's for what they define as the greater good. And here's the most important lesson. The Tuskegee men trusted. They believed that doctors with federal credentials representing the United States government were there to help them.
They signed forms. They showed up for appointments.
they followed instructions. And that trust was exploited, betrayed, and turned into an instrument of their own destruction. Their wives trusted. Their children paid the price. And for 40 years, hundreds of people who knew what was happening chose to protect the experiment instead of protecting the victims. So I ask you again, do you trust? When authorities present programs that require your participation, that promise your benefit, that are imposed with urgency and conducted en masse, do you simply obey, or do you ask questions? Do you demand transparency? Do you look for documents? Do you verify that the promised protections actually exist and work? Do you remember that Tuskegee happened not because there were no rules, but because nobody cared enough to follow them? Do you recognize that the Tuskegee researchers were not monsters, but respectable professionals operating within a system that validated their actions, and that the same system continues operating today, with new faces, but with the same fundamental logic? Leave your answer in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and never forget, Tuskegee documents are publicly available now. You can read them. You can see the annual reports where researchers calmly describe the stages of deterioration they observed. You can read the memos where administrators approved continuation of the experiment even after the cure became available. You can see the letters where doctors sabotaged treatment opportunities. It's all there, documented, preserved, undeniable. And the reason you can see these documents now is because someone leaked the story, because journalists investigated it, because the public demanded answers, because the pressure became too unbearable to ignore. It wasn't because authorities spontaneously decided to be honest. It was because they were forced. And that's the only thing that always works. Persistent public pressure, uncomfortable questions, refusal to accept official narratives without evidence, and the constant reminder that trust must be earned, not demanded, and that institutions that lie lose the right to be believed. That's the legacy of Tuskegee. Not just the horror of what happened, but the lesson of how it was finally exposed and stopped. And you, what are you going to do with that lesson?